The Nexus 5 is easily one of the most loved Nexus devices, nay, Android devices of all time. When the Nexus 6 came out, we were all wondering maybe it would have been a little bit better to have a new Nexus 5 with new specs because the 6 was huge. Well, we don't have to worry anymore. We know what that device looks like and we know its name. It's called the 5X. The Nexus 5X is in just about every way the direct successor to the Nexus 5. Everything about the build just reeks about the original Nexus 5. It's got a polycarbonate back, it's got the same kind of look and feel, and it's got that same kind of, this is too powerful to be this light as I hold it in my hand feel as the original Nexus 5 did. The build of the device itself is actually really strong. It's got basically no flex. Everything feels sturdy, and it doesn't feel cheap, it feels inexpensive. Your finger also lands right where that fingerprint reader is, which we'll get into very shortly, but it's such a nice little welcome thing to not have to shimmy your finger up like you do on the Nexus 6P. So, Marshmallow. On the 5X, it's about as good as you could expect it to be. It's stock Android after all. Everything from now on tap to native APIs for the fingerprint reader, so everything works with LastPass. It's great. I miss a handful of the gestures, the fun stuff that you can do with the Moto X Pure, because right now all you can do is double tap the home button or the power button to get to the camera. But it's still a fantastic software experience. If you want to see more about Marshmallow, boom, we've got a video for you right here. So the fingerprint reader on the 5X, yeah, it's really good. Even training it is really fast. It really only takes 5 or 6 taps to do, and it works basically every single time. And it works the way that Google intended it to, too. When you pull it out of your pocket, you touch it, and it's already unlocked by the time it hits your face. Your lock screen is basically obsolete. Plus, if you were worried about cases, don't be. The cutouts work perfectly fine. You gotta dig a little deeper with your finger, but the sensor works great. All right, around the front of the device, we've got a nice big screen, and that screen is good. It's pretty good. I miss AMOLED. That's the major thing. I really miss AMOLED, and I know that I can't blame that on the 5X, so given the context of the device, the display's pretty strong. The viewing angles are really good, actually. The color reproduction is pretty good, and the pixel density is nice and high at 424. It's not the best display that I've ever seen, but it's definitely a good one. Battery in this thing started off pretty strong, like really strong, and then it took a pretty sharp turn towards the ordinary. I was able to make it through a full day, but any longer than that, you're kind of pushing it. Luckily, it is really easy to top off with crazy fast charging. With the charger that it comes with, the 5X can make it from 15% to 30% in literally just 4 minutes. With a full hour, it can be back up to almost full. Right above that fingerprint reader, you're gonna find the brand new 12.3 megapixel Sony sensor that's inside the 5X, and it is no slouch. It is much better than the sensor that was in the Nexus 5, and it's even way better than the sensor that was in the Nexus 6 from last year, which was also pretty great. You have laser autofocus, which is great in theory, but in practice it wound up focusing on the wrong subjects, on the wrong plane more often than not, but it did do that pretty quickly. Even without OIS, the photos from the Nexus 5X were actually pretty fantastic. Almost everything was pretty sharp when I could get the focus to focus on what I wanted it to focus on, and the colors were pretty strong. Everything from my day-to-day usage with the 5X's camera was perfectly fine, even without OIS. And yes, the sensor here is exactly the same as the sensor in the Nexus 6P. The only difference is that on the 6P, you can shoot all the way up to 240 frames per second, while on the 5X, you're stuck at just 120. But even that is nothing to shake a stick at. My major gripe with the 5X has been some pretty inconsistent performance. From out of the box, it went from well exceeding expectations to pretty thoroughly disappointing to meeting them at exactly where I would expect them to be. This kind of made the review difficult to put together because the performance was so inconsistent and so across the board. I wound up removing a ton of apps that I thought might be the culprit, and eventually it did get better, but I wasn't even really able to pinpoint what exactly it was. So while normal sort of everyday usage wound up pretty reasonable, there were a lot of times that I've noticed what I would refer to as GPU jank when I turned on GPU rendering on the device. More than once, I wound up missing a photo opportunity to the camera not opening quite quickly enough, and that's something that I had really thought was something of the past after using Samsung's line. I have a really bad sneaking suspicion that the all-around sluggishness on the 5X is due to the 5X's software-accelerated encryption. This was an issue on last year's Nexus 6. Lots of users found themselves disabling encryption in favor of better performance, and if it were up to me, I'd probably do the same thing with the 5X. With Marshmallow, encryption is now mandatory. All manufacturers are required to support full disk encryption, so I'd be surprised if we ever saw a toggle in the settings. That said, despite all of that, once the device kind of settled into a groove, I found myself pretty relatively happy with the performance of the 808 that's under the hood despite some of those rough edges. For me, with so many devices in the price range of $399, the 5X comes in at $379. What it comes down to is the features. If having Nexus imprint is a must for you, then obviously the 5X is probably your best bet. If that doesn't matter to you quite so much as having gestures and customization, then maybe the Moto X Pure is a little bit more your speed. The 5X is a great phone. It's a really good phone. I feel like Google finally made the right compromises to get a price point that they wanted to be competitive so that it's in that sort of budget range. It's a great phone, and I think it's a pretty solid buy. In fact, the build quality is kind of exactly what I want out of a device. So now that I'm using a 6P a whole lot more, I find myself wishing I had a 6P in the body of a 5X. Anyway, let us know what you guys think about the 5X and if there's anything else that we missed. I had a great time reviewing this thing for you guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. As always, thank you for watching, be kind to one another, and I'll catch you in the next video. Oh, by the way, it's a really solid buy.